Of 21-year-old Hannah Cornelius has described the impact of her murder as devastating and appealed to the court to impose life without parole. Her father and aunt testified today in aggravation of sentence of the three men convicted of a rape and murder. Vernon Vetboy, Geraldo Parsons and Eben van Niekerk were found guilty on 10 counts in the Cape Town High Court yesterday. Our reporter Mariska Buota has been monitoring the story.
Please, you have to find her. She's still with them. Those were the words Cheslin Marsh repeated to police during the early hours of May 27, 2017. He believed there was still time. He believed his friend could still be found. What he didn't realize was that the officers listening to him already had information that would change everything. Earlier that morning, investigators outside Stellenbosch, South Africa, had responded to a scene that quickly transformed what first appeared to be a missing person case into a major homicide investigation. As Cheslin struggled to explain what had happened, detectives were already trying to understand how two university students, heading home after a night with friends, had become the focus of a rapidly growing investigation. Only a few hours before, Cheslin Marsh and 21-year-old Hannah Cornelius had left a local bar after spending the evening with friends. Hannah offered to drive Cheslin home rather than let him walk alone through the quiet streets before sunrise. It was a simple decision made out of concern for a friend, one that neither of them had any reason to believe would become the starting point of a criminal investigation that would receive national attention. Before the sun came up, investigators were already working to answer difficult questions. Who had crossed paths with Hannah and Cheslin that morning? Where had they been taken? And why had one of them managed to reach the police while the other remained missing? The answers didn't come from guesses or speculation. They came from documented evidence. Surveillance cameras captured critical moments. Bank records established part of the timeline. Witness accounts filled in missing pieces. Every confirmed detail helped investigators move one step closer to understanding what had happened during those early morning hours. What makes this case stand out is how quickly the evidence began to connect. A decision made in seconds. A vehicle seen in more than one location. A failed attempt to access a bank account. Individually, those details meant very little. Together, they gave detectives a clear path forward. If you appreciate true crime documentaries built on verified evidence, documented investigations, and courtroom facts rather than speculation, consider subscribing. Every documentary on this channel is carefully researched to present the most accurate account supported by available records. To understand how investigators reconstructed the events of that morning, we need to go back several hours, to what seemed like an ordinary Friday night between two university friends long before anyone realized they were about to become part of one of South Africa's most widely reported criminal cases. As daylight spread across Kraaifontein on the morning of May 27, 2017, police were still trying to make sense of a situation that seemed to be changing by the minute. The information coming in was fragmented. Officers knew someone needed help, but they didn't yet know how many people were involved or how the events were connected. Then a patrol unit noticed a young man walking slowly along the side of the road. He appeared exhausted and was clearly struggling to keep moving. The officers stopped immediately, expecting they might be responding to the aftermath of a robbery or another isolated incident. At that point, there was nothing to suggest they were about to become part of an investigation that would draw attention across South Africa. The young man introduced himself as Cheslin Marsh, a student at Stellenbosch University. As officers spoke with him, Cheslin calmly described what he could remember. Earlier that morning, he and a close friend had been traveling together when they encountered several men. Within moments, the situation had changed completely, and the two friends had become separated. From the beginning, Cheslin's concern wasn't about replacing property or explaining what had happened to him. His focus stayed on one person, Hannah Cornelius. He repeatedly told officers that she was still missing and urged them to begin searching without delay. He described the blue and white vintage Volkswagen they had been traveling in and gave investigators every detail he could remember, hoping it would help officers find her as quickly as possible. As detectives documented his account, they compared every detail with information already circulating among responding units that morning. The vehicle description matched. The timeline appeared consistent. The locations were beginning to connect. What had first seemed like separate reports were now pointing toward the same investigation. That realization changed the direction of the case almost immediately. Detectives understood they weren't looking at a routine assault or a standard vehicle theft. The available evidence suggested something much larger had taken place during the early hours of that Saturday morning. Before they could determine exactly what had happened, they needed to answer a more immediate question. Who were Hannah Cornelius and Cheslin Marsh before their names became central to this investigation? Understanding that would become an important part of understanding the case itself. If you appreciate true crime documentaries built on verified evidence instead of speculation, consider subscribing. Every documentary on this channel is carefully researched using documented sources to present the facts as accurately and responsibly as possible. Long before her name appeared in court records or news reports across South Africa, Hannah Cornelius was known for something much simpler. She was the kind of person friends could rely on. Hannah was raised in a close family where education, responsibility, and kindness were part of everyday life. Her father, Willem Cornelius, built a successful career as an attorney. Her mother, Teresa Cornelius, was a respected music teacher who encouraged creativity while placing great importance on family. Those who knew them described a home built on support, routine, and strong family values. She was especially close to her younger brother, who lives with a severe form of autism. Family members later spoke about the patience Hannah showed him and the time she made for him whenever she returned home from university. Looking after the people she cared about wasn't something she talked about. It was simply part of who she was. By 2017, Hannah was studying at Stellenbosch University, one of South Africa's best-known universities. Like many students her age, she was focused on building her future while enjoying university life. Friends described her as approachable, thoughtful, and easy to spend time with. She wasn't someone who tried to be the center of attention. Instead, people remembered her for being dependable, respectful, and willing to help whenever someone needed it. Away from lectures, Hannah enjoyed spending time with friends, listening to music, and taking part in the social side of campus life. She had settled comfortably into the university community and was looking forward to what came after graduation. Those who knew her believed she had every reason to be optimistic about the future. One quality appears again and again in interviews with friends and family. People trusted Hannah. If she made a promise, she kept it. If someone needed help, she usually offered it without hesitation. It wasn't an effort to impress anyone. It was simply the way she treated people. Among that circle of friends was Cheslin Marsh. The two studied at the same university and shared many of the same friends. Their relationship was never described as romantic. Instead, those who knew them consistently referred to them as close friends who enjoyed spending time together within the same social group. That detail matters because it explains the level of trust between them. Neither of them had any reason to believe that an ordinary evening with friends would require difficult decisions before the night was over. Looking back now, it's easy to search for warning signs or moments that seemed out of place. But according to the people who knew Hannah best, there were none. She was simply a young woman focused on her education, surrounded by family who loved her, friends who respected her, and a future that appeared wide open. Understanding who Hannah was before May 2017 is important because this investigation is about more than the evidence collected afterward. It's also about remembering the person at the center of the case, long before her name became known far beyond the university campus where she was building her life. Before his name appeared in police reports and courtroom testimony, Cheslin Marsh was simply another university student looking ahead to the next stage of his life. He was studying at Stellenbosch University, one of South Africa's leading academic institutions, where he had built a close circle of friends and settled into the routine of student life. Those who knew Cheslin described him as friendly, approachable, and someone who got along easily with people from different backgrounds. He wasn't known for seeking attention. Instead, friends remembered him as calm, respectful, and easy to be around. Like many students, much of his time revolved around lectures, assignments, and spending weekends with classmates. The friendships formed on campus became an important part of everyday life, and one of those friendships was with Hannah Cornelius. Although some early public reports created confusion about their relationship, the evidence presented during the investigation and later in court consistently showed that Hannah and Cheslin were close friends. They shared many of the same classmates, attended the same university, and regularly spent time with the same social group. There was no documented romantic relationship between them. What connected them was mutual trust and a friendship that had grown naturally through university life. On Friday, May 26, 2017, that group of friends met in Stellenbosch to relax after the academic week. Nothing about the evening stood out. Friends talked, laughed, and gradually began leaving as the night came to an end. It was the kind of gathering repeated countless times on university campuses across the country. When it was time to leave, Cheslin planned to walk home. His home wasn't far away and it was a route he knew well. Even so, Hannah wasn't comfortable with the idea of him making the walk alone during the early hours of the morning. According to the evidence later presented in court, She offered to drive him instead. Cheslin accepted without giving the decision much thought. To both of them, it was simply a short drive before each returned home. There was no indication that this ordinary act between friends would soon become a central part of a criminal investigation. Looking back, that decision has often been remembered because it reflected the kind of people they were. Hannah was known for looking out for others, and Cheslin accepted the offer as any friend might. Neither had any reason to believe the rest of the night would be any different from countless others they had experienced as university students. In the years that followed, Cheslin chose not to allow one night to define the rest of his life. While the legal process would become an important part of his future, he also made a personal decision to continue moving forward. That determination would later shape the direction of his education and the career he chose to pursue. Before any of that happened, however, investigators first needed to establish one final piece of the timeline. What exactly happened after Hannah started the engine and drove away from Stellenbosch with Cheslin in the passenger seat? That answer begins with the final hours of Friday night, when an ordinary ride home was about to take an unexpected turn. The final week of May 2017 looked much like any other at Stellenbosch University. Lecture halls were full. Students moved between classes, libraries, cafes, and residence buildings, balancing assignments with the excitement that usually comes at the end of another academic week. By Friday afternoon, many were making plans to relax before returning to their studies. That was the atmosphere Hannah Cornelius and Cheslin Marsh were part of. According to friends and information later presented during the investigation, Hannah spent the week focused on her university life and the people closest to her. There were no reported disputes, no public conflicts, and nothing to suggest she believed anything unusual was about to happen. Those who saw her during the week described her as her normal self, friendly, positive, and looking forward to the weekend. Cheslin's week followed a similar pattern. Like many students, he divided his time between academic responsibilities and spending time with friends. The social circle he shared with Hannah had become part of everyday university life, where meeting after classes or at the end of the week was common. Stellenbosch itself offered a setting that many students found welcoming. Known internationally for its university, historic streets, and surrounding wine region, it attracted thousands of local and international students every year. But alongside that reputation there was another reality. Like many communities across South Africa, personal safety remained an ongoing conversation. Students were regularly encouraged by both the university and local authorities to stay aware of their surroundings, avoid unnecessary risks after dark, and whenever possible, travel with friends rather than alone. Those recommendations weren't driven by fear. They were practical advice that had become part of student life. That context helps explain a decision made during the early hours of Friday night. On May 26, Hannah and Cheslin joined several friends at a local bar in Stellenbosch. According to witness accounts, the evening was relaxed and uneventful. People talked about university, laughed together, and enjoyed the start of the weekend. Nothing stood out as unusual, and there were no reported incidents involving the group. As the night came to an end, everyone gradually began heading home. Cheslin planned to walk the remaining distance to his house. It wasn't a long walk, but it would be in the early hours of the morning, when the streets were noticeably quieter than they had been only a short time before. Hannah wasn't comfortable with that. Friends later said that looking out for others was simply part of her personality. Offering someone a ride wasn't out of character. It was the kind of decision she had made before without thinking twice about it. Instead of driving directly back to her own residence, she decided to take Cheslin home first. He accepted the offer, expecting nothing more than a short drive through familiar streets. The route was one they knew well. Traffic had almost disappeared, and the city had settled into the calm that usually arrives before sunrise. From everything investigators later established, there was nothing during those first few minutes of the drive to suggest anything was out of the ordinary. Then, at approximately 3:23 a.m., Hannah brought her blue and white vintage Volkswagen to a stop near Cheslin's home. At that exact moment, what had been an ordinary Friday night came to an abrupt end, and a new timeline began. One that investigators would later reconstruct minute by minute using surveillance footage, witness statements, digital records, and other documented evidence. By the early hours of Saturday, May 27, 2017, the evening in Stellenbosch was winding down. Restaurants were closing, the last conversations between friends were coming to an end, and the busy student streets had become noticeably quieter. Most people who had spent Friday night in town were already making their way home, expecting the weekend to begin like any other. Hannah Cornelius and Cheslin Marsh were no different. After spending the evening with friends at a local bar, They left shortly after 3 a.m. Witnesses later described the atmosphere as relaxed. Nothing unusual had happened during the evening, and there was no indication that anyone had been following them or paying particular attention to them. The plan was simple. Cheslin intended to walk the rest of the way home, but Hannah had already decided she would drive him instead. It was a short detour before returning to her own residence, and neither of them had any reason to think twice about it. They walked to Hannah's blue and white vintage Volkswagen, got inside and pulled away. The drive lasted only a few minutes. Traffic was almost non-existent, and the streets around Stellenbosch had become quiet as the night gave way to the first hours of Saturday morning. At approximately 3:23 a.m., Hannah brought the Volkswagen to a stop near Cheslin's home. According to evidence later presented during court proceedings, the vehicle pulled onto a grassy shoulder beside the road. Neither of them stepped out immediately. Like many friends at the end of an evening, they remained inside the car for a brief conversation before saying goodbye. At that same time, 4 men were walking through the neighborhood. Investigators would later establish through surveillance footage that there was no verified evidence showing the students had been specifically targeted before arriving there. Instead, the footage suggested the 4 men happened to notice the parked vehicle while moving through the area. They continued walking. For several seconds they passed the Volkswagen without stopping. Then something changed. The group slowed their pace. One looked back toward the parked car. The others did the same. After briefly looking around the street, all 4 turned around together and began walking directly toward the Volkswagen. The surveillance footage would later become one of the earliest pieces of evidence investigators used to reconstruct the timeline. Although the video quality was limited, the sequence of events was clear. The timestamps showed exactly when the group first appeared, when they turned around, and when they reached the vehicle. Everything happened quickly. According to evidence presented during the investigation, the 4 men approached the Volkswagen and confronted its occupants without warning. Within moments, Hannah and Cheslin found themselves in a situation they had not anticipated and had no realistic opportunity to avoid. Investigators later identified the 4 individuals as Vernon Whitboy, Geraldo Parsons, Eben Van Niekerk, and Nashville Julius. At that moment, however, those names meant nothing to Hannah or Cheslin. They were simply 4 unknown men standing beside a parked vehicle in the early hours of the morning. According to the evidence later presented in court, personal belongings including mobile phones, wallets, and other valuables were taken during the confrontation. The group also gained control of Hannah's Volkswagen. That decision changed the direction of the entire incident. Had the encounter ended there, investigators would likely have been dealing with a different type of case. Instead, the Volkswagen remained at the center of what happened next. Only minutes after stopping near Cheslin's home, the vehicle pulled away from the roadside. No nearby residents reported realizing the significance of what they had just seen. From a distance, it would have appeared to be another car driving through the neighborhood before sunrise. By the time daylight reached Stellenbosch, detectives would begin collecting surveillance footage from nearby cameras, comparing timestamps and documenting every confirmed movement of that blue and white Volkswagen. Those first few minutes would become the foundation of the investigation, providing detectives with the earliest confirmed timeline and the first clues that this case extended far beyond a chance encounter on a quiet street. As the hours passed, Cheslin Marsh found himself alone in an unfamiliar area, trying to make sense of what had happened. According to evidence later presented in court, he began walking toward the nearest houses, hoping someone would help him contact the police and, more importantly, begin looking for Hannah Cornelius. The neighborhood was still quiet. Most residents were only beginning to wake up as daylight approached. There were few vehicles on the road and almost no one outside. Eventually, Cheslin reached a home where he believed someone might be able to help. He called out until the homeowners came outside. From their perspective, the situation was difficult to understand. They saw a stranger standing on their property during the early hours of the morning. They had no idea what had taken place or whether anyone else might still be nearby. Cheslin immediately asked if he could use a telephone. According to later accounts, he explained that he needed to call his mother and urged them to contact the police because his friend was still missing. He tried to convince them that every minute mattered. The homeowners hesitated. Without knowing the full situation, they were concerned about their own safety and chose not to invite him inside. While their response would later be discussed publicly, investigators found no evidence that they understood the scale of what had already taken place. Realizing he would have to keep searching for help, Cheslin thanked them and continued walking. It would not be long before another opportunity appeared. A police patrol vehicle was traveling through the area as part of its normal duties when Cheslin stepped toward the roadside and signaled for the officers to stop. This time the response was immediate. The officers pulled over and quickly recognized that they were speaking with someone connected to a serious incident. They first focused on gathering the most urgent information. Who are you? Where did this happen? Is anyone else still missing? Cheslin answered each question as clearly as he could. He identified himself, explained that Hannah Cornelius had not been found, described their distinctive blue and white Volkswagen, and provided the location where they had last been together. He repeatedly emphasized that officers needed to begin looking for her without delay. As one officer continued speaking with Cheslin, another transmitted the information through police communication channels. Dispatch operators immediately documented the details. The names, the vehicle description, the reported locations, the estimated timeline. Those details were then shared with officers already working throughout the surrounding area. Within minutes, something important became clear. The information Cheslin was providing closely matched reports that investigators had already begun reviewing earlier that morning. Separate calls were now pointing toward the same investigation. The response expanded quickly. Detectives, patrol officers, and forensic personnel were assigned specific responsibilities. Some focused on interviewing witnesses. Others began identifying every confirmed location connected to the timeline. Each site was secured to preserve potential evidence before weather, traffic, or public activity could affect it. Investigators photographed the scenes, recorded measurements, documented vehicle locations, and began collecting physical and digital evidence using standard forensic procedures. Every step followed established investigative protocols designed to preserve the accuracy of the case from the very beginning. At the same time, officers confirmed Hannah Cornelius's location. The area was immediately secured, public access was restricted, and forensic specialists assumed responsibility for documenting the scene in accordance with standard investigative procedures. From that moment forward, every finding would be carefully recorded and later compared with witness statements, surveillance footage, telephone records, and financial data. By the middle of the morning, investigators understood they were dealing with far more than an isolated overnight incident. A coordinated homicide investigation was now officially underway. The immediate emergency had become a race to reconstruct the previous several hours. Detectives now had one surviving witness, multiple locations, and the first confirmed pieces of the timeline. The next challenge was identifying the people responsible. Fortunately for investigators, those individuals had already begun leaving behind a digital trail that would prove far more detailed than they ever expected. By the time detectives officially opened the homicide investigation, they already understood one important fact. This case would not be solved through assumptions. Every conclusion would have to be supported by evidence. The first priority was preserving every location connected to the case before anything could be disturbed. Investigators divided their work between multiple scenes, each offering a different part of the story. One team documented the location where Hannah Cornelius was found. Another processed the area where Cheslin Marsh had been left behind. A third focused on recovering Hannah's blue and white Volkswagen, which officers still believed could provide some of the strongest physical evidence in the investigation. Every location was photographed before anything was moved. Forensic specialists carefully marked potential evidence, documented measurements, and created detailed scene diagrams. Investigators knew that even the smallest overlooked detail could later become the piece that connected every event together. At the same time, detectives began interviewing Cheslin. Although physically exhausted, he was able to provide investigators with the first reliable account of what had happened after he and Hannah left Stellenbosch. He described where they had spent the evening, approximately what time they left, the route they traveled, and the location where Hannah stopped the Volkswagen outside his home shortly after 3:20 that morning. He explained that several men suddenly approached the vehicle. Everything happened quickly. The encounter lasted only moments before control of the situation shifted. His statement established the starting point of the investigation. Now detectives needed independent evidence to verify every part of his account. Fortunately, modern investigations rarely depend on witness statements alone. The streets of Stellenbosch were covered by public and private surveillance cameras. Investigators immediately began requesting recordings from nearby businesses, municipal traffic cameras, and private security systems located along the route identified by Cheslin. Collecting surveillance footage was a race against time. Many recording systems automatically overwrite older files after only a few days. Officers spent hours visiting businesses, residences, and local security companies to secure copies before any recordings disappeared. One camera proved especially important. Positioned near the location where Hannah had stopped her Volkswagen, it captured exactly what investigators needed. The timestamp matched Cheslin's account. The blue and white Volkswagen could be seen coming to a stop. A short time later, four individuals appeared on the recording. Investigators carefully reviewed the footage frame by frame. Nothing suggested the group had been waiting for Hannah or following her vehicle through the city. Instead, the video indicated they had been walking through the neighborhood before noticing the parked Volkswagen. That distinction mattered. It suggested investigators were dealing with an opportunistic crime rather than a carefully planned attack targeting Hannah personally. The footage continued only briefly before the Volkswagen left the area. Even though facial details were limited, detectives now had an accurate starting time and visual confirmation supporting the surviving witness's account. That single recording became the foundation for rebuilding the rest of the timeline. The investigation then shifted toward Hannah's financial records. Detectives contacted her bank and requested immediate access to recent account activity under emergency investigative procedures. The request produced an important result. Only a short time after the vehicle had been taken, Hannah's bank card had been used at an automated teller machine located well outside Stellenbosch. The transaction had failed. Investigators immediately obtained surveillance footage from that service station. When the recording arrived, detectives watched it repeatedly. A man stepped out of Hannah's Volkswagen and walked directly toward the ATM. He appeared comfortable, showing little concern about being recorded. He inserted the card, entered a personal identification number, and waited. The transaction was declined. No money was dispensed. Although the attempt failed, investigators considered it one of the biggest breakthroughs of the entire investigation. The camera had captured a clear image of the individual using Hannah's bank card. That image would later become one of the most recognizable pieces of evidence presented during the case. The footage also revealed something else. The blue and white Volkswagen remained intact. It had not been abandoned. The group was still driving it several hours after the initial incident. That decision would ultimately make them far easier to locate. Detectives immediately requested additional recordings from businesses along nearby roads. Every confirmed sighting of the Volkswagen was entered into an expanding investigative timeline. Each camera added another confirmed location. Each timestamp narrowed the suspect's movements. Meanwhile, financial investigators continued examining banking activity connected to both Hannah and Cheslin. Every attempted withdrawal, card transaction, and banking inquiry was compared against surveillance footage and police reports. Investigators wanted every financial event placed in exact chronological order. The digital evidence continued growing. Cellular providers were served with legal requests for telephone records connected to the victims. Although precise live tracking technology was far more limited in 2017 than many people assume, call records and location data still allowed investigators to estimate movements, confirm communication timelines, and compare those findings with other evidence already collected. Detectives also examined activity surrounding the suspect's known associates. Every verified record was carefully compared with CCTV footage, banking activity, and witness statements. Nothing was accepted unless multiple sources supported the same conclusion. Investigators understood that reliable cases are built through confirmation, not assumption. At the same time, officers conducted an extensive witness canvass throughout Stellenbosch and neighboring communities. Residents living near Cheslin's home were interviewed. Employees at businesses operating overnight were questioned. Fuel station workers were asked to review events from the early morning hours. Drivers who might have passed the Volkswagen were encouraged to contact investigators. Many interviews produced little information. But detectives expected that. Large investigations are often built from dozens of seemingly minor observations that only become meaningful when viewed together. As reports continued arriving, analysts gathered inside the investigation room and began constructing a detailed chronological timeline across large evidence boards. Every confirmed event received its own position. Every surveillance image. Every witness statement. Every banking record. Every police report. Every verified timestamp. Slowly, the gaps between events became smaller. What had first appeared to be a confusing series of unrelated incidents was beginning to reveal a consistent sequence supported by independent evidence. Investigators no longer relied on one witness or one camera. They now had multiple forms of evidence pointing toward the same group of individuals. Before long, another important discovery emerged. The investigation revealed that the suspects had continued using the Volkswagen long after the first failed ATM transaction. That decision generated new surveillance footage, additional witnesses and more digital evidence. Instead of disappearing, they had unknowingly continued documenting their own movements across the city. For detectives, every additional stop created another opportunity to identify them. Every minute they remained in that vehicle increased the amount of evidence available to investigators. The search was no longer based on descriptions alone. It had become an evidence-driven investigation with a growing digital trail. And that trail was leading detectives directly toward the people responsible. If you're enjoying this investigation, subscribing helps you catch every new documentary we release. We focus on evidence, investigative work, and verified facts, not sensationalism. By Saturday afternoon, investigators had reached an important turning point. The emergency response had ended. Now the focus shifted entirely to building a case supported by facts. Inside the investigation room, officers began arranging every verified event into a single timeline. Surveillance recordings, banking activity, witness interviews, radio communications, vehicle sightings, and forensic findings were placed in chronological order. Nothing was accepted without confirmation from at least one additional source. Their objective was simple: make the evidence tell the story. One of the earliest breakthroughs came from security cameras at a service station. The footage showed a man attempting to use Hannah Cornelius's bank card at an ATM only a short time after investigators believed the Volkswagen had been taken. He wasn't hiding his face. He appeared calm, completed the transaction attempt, waited for the machine to respond, then returned to the vehicle. The transaction itself was unsuccessful. But for investigators, the outcome mattered less than the recording. The camera had captured a clear image. When detectives compared that image with existing police records, they identified the individual as Vernon Whitboy. That identification immediately gave the investigation direction. Rather than searching for unknown individuals across an entire region, detectives could now begin working from someone already known to law enforcement. Investigators reviewed documented associates, previous police contacts, residential addresses, and communication records that were legally available to them. As additional information was verified, 3 more names consistently appeared during the investigation: Geraldo Parsons, Eben Van Niekerk, Nashville Julius. Each name represented another lead that required independent confirmation. Detectives were careful not to make assumptions. Every connection had to be supported by evidence before any operational decisions were made. While investigators continued analyzing information inside the command center, officers throughout the region remained alert for Hannah's distinctive blue and white Volkswagen. Its appearance made it stand out from most vehicles on the road. Police understood that locating the vehicle could answer several unanswered questions at once. Later that day, plainclothes officers noticed a vehicle matching the broadcast description traveling through city traffic. Instead of immediately attempting a traffic stop, supervisors approved a controlled surveillance operation. The reasoning was straightforward. Maintaining observation would allow additional officers to move into position while reducing unnecessary risk to other motorists. The unmarked vehicle quietly remained behind the Volkswagen while nearby patrol units received updates through police radio. Gradually, additional officers moved closer. For several minutes, everything remained controlled. Then the driver appeared to recognize the growing police presence. The Volkswagen accelerated. What had begun as surveillance quickly became an active police pursuit. Officers followed while continuing to coordinate through dispatch, allowing units ahead to position themselves strategically rather than relying on speed alone. The route eventually led toward a nearby farming area. The road offered few options. Within minutes, the Volkswagen reached a dead end. Realizing the vehicle could go no farther, the occupants left it behind and attempted to escape in different directions. Police teams immediately established a containment area. Instead of concentrating on only one direction, officers spread out to limit every possible escape route. The coordinated approach proved effective. Before long, Vernon Whitboy and Geraldo Parsons were taken into custody. Meanwhile, investigators secured the abandoned Volkswagen. Long before any detailed examination began, forensic specialists photographed the vehicle exactly as it had been found. Every door, every seat, every visible item, and every area of potential evidentiary value was documented before anything was touched. Only after that documentation was complete did specialists begin collecting forensic material for laboratory examination. At the same time, detectives began interviewing the 2 men separately. Keeping them apart was an intentional investigative strategy. Separate interviews allowed investigators to compare each account without giving either person an opportunity to coordinate responses. The detectives already possessed a growing amount of evidence. Instead of revealing everything they knew, they asked carefully structured questions designed to compare each statement against the verified timeline. As the interviews progressed, differences began appearing. Certain times did not match. Some movements conflicted with surveillance footage. Other explanations differed from banking records and witness accounts. Rather than confronting every inconsistency immediately, investigators continued gathering information, allowing each interview to develop naturally. Only after establishing a complete picture did detectives begin presenting selected pieces of verified evidence. According to court records, the interviews eventually produced another major development. Information provided during questioning identified 2 additional individuals connected to the investigation. Those names were Eben van Niekerk and Nashville Julius. Because investigators had already been verifying those connections independently, the information strengthened what the evidence was already showing rather than creating an entirely new direction. The following day, operational teams located both men and placed them into custody without a lengthy search. Less than 2 days after Cheslin Marsh first spoke with responding officers, every person investigators believed was connected to the case had been located. Even then, detectives considered the investigation far from complete. An arrest was only one step. The evidence still needed to withstand detailed legal examination. Over the following days, investigators carefully reviewed surveillance recordings again, confirmed witness timelines, examined financial records, analyzed forensic reports, and compared every documented event with the statements collected during the investigation. Each verified source supported another. By the time prosecutors received the completed case file, the investigation no longer depended on a single witness or one piece of evidence. Instead, it rested on surveillance footage, financial records, forensic findings, documented interviews, police reports, witness testimony, and a timeline assembled from independently verified facts. Together, those findings showed investigators exactly what had happened and when it happened. The investigation had answered the questions detectives faced during those first uncertain hours. Now the focus would shift from the investigation room to the courtroom, where every piece of evidence would be tested before a judge. By the time investigators completed the arrests, the direction of the case had changed once again. The search for those involved was over. Now came the far more demanding task of proving exactly what had happened, minute by minute, using evidence that could withstand close examination in court. Detectives understood that one witness alone would never be enough. Every statement had to be supported by independent evidence. Every conclusion had to be supported by documented facts. That became the guiding principle of the investigation. Inside the incident room, investigators assembled a detailed chronological timeline covering every confirmed event from the evening of Friday, May 26, 2017, through the arrests made over the following days. Large evidence boards displayed surveillance images, police reports, financial records, witness interviews, forensic findings, and communication logs. Nothing was added unless it had first been verified. The reconstruction began with Hannah Cornelius and Cheslin Marsh leaving a local bar in Stellenbosch after spending the evening with friends. Several witnesses confirmed seeing them together before they left. Their accounts matched the times already established by investigators. According to those interviews, Hannah had offered to drive Cheslin home rather than allow him to walk alone late at night. That decision explained why both students were traveling in Hannah's distinctive blue and white Volkswagen during the early hours of Saturday morning. From that point onward, technology became one of the investigation's strongest tools. Security cameras positioned near Cheslin's neighborhood recorded the Volkswagen arriving shortly after 3:20 a.m. The timestamp corresponded with Cheslin's first statement to police. The footage also confirmed that 4 individuals approached the stationary vehicle only moments later. Although the recording did not capture every detail, it established something investigators considered highly important. It independently confirmed both the location and the timing described by the surviving witness. Detectives then expanded the search for additional recordings. Businesses, fuel stations, traffic cameras, and private security systems along the suspected route were contacted. Every confirmed sighting of the Volkswagen added another verified point to the timeline. Instead of relying on estimates, investigators could now follow the vehicle's movements through a series of documented timestamps. Financial evidence provided another layer of confirmation. Emergency requests submitted to banking institutions produced records showing activity involving cards belonging to the victims after the vehicle had been taken. Those records matched surveillance footage collected from automated teller machines. Investigators compared transaction times with CCTV recordings and confirmed that both sources consistently supported one another. The recovered Volkswagen became another important source of information. Before any examination began, forensic specialists documented the vehicle exactly as officers had found it. Photographs were taken from every angle. The interior was carefully recorded. Potential evidence was marked before collection, so its original location remained documented throughout the investigation. Laboratory specialists later examined fingerprints, biological material suitable for analysis, and other trace evidence recovered from the vehicle. Each finding was compared with known reference samples and then evaluated alongside the growing body of investigative evidence. Meanwhile, detectives continued interviewing each of the 4 accused separately. This approach allowed investigators to compare individual accounts without giving anyone an opportunity to coordinate their responses. The interviews followed a structured strategy. Detectives already possessed surveillance footage, banking records, witness interviews, and forensic reports. Rather than revealing everything immediately, they asked detailed questions designed to compare each response with evidence that had already been verified. As expected, not every explanation aligned with the documented timeline. Certain movements differed. Sometimes did not match. Other statements conflicted with independent records already collected during the investigation. Whenever those differences appeared, detectives returned to the evidence rather than relying on opinion. Every inconsistency was tested against surveillance footage, financial records, forensic findings, witness testimony, and official police documentation. Only information supported by multiple independent sources became part of the final investigative reconstruction. Investigators also interviewed responding police officers, forensic personnel, local residents, service station employees, and other individuals who had encountered parts of the investigation during its earliest stages. Many of those conversations appeared routine when viewed individually. Together, they confirmed key moments already established through digital and physical evidence. As the investigation progressed, the sequence of events became increasingly clear. No single piece of evidence solved the case. Instead, dozens of independently verified findings fit together with remarkable consistency. Surveillance recordings supported financial records. Financial records supported witness testimony. Witness testimony aligned with forensic examinations. Forensic examinations reinforced the documented timeline. Each source strengthened the others. By the time investigators submitted the completed case to prosecutors, they had assembled a reconstruction supported by objective evidence collected from multiple independent sources. The case no longer relied on one statement or one discovery. It rested on a comprehensive body of documented evidence that consistently pointed in the same direction. The investigation had answered the questions detectives faced during those first uncertain hours. The next phase would determine whether that evidence could withstand detailed examination before the High Court, where every witness, every forensic finding, and every investigative decision would be carefully tested under South Africa's judicial process. By the time investigators completed their work, prosecutors believed they had assembled a comprehensive case supported by documented evidence collected over several months. What had started as a confusing investigation had developed into a carefully verified timeline built from forensic examinations, surveillance footage, financial records, digital evidence, witness accounts, and recovered property. Each piece was intended to answer one question: could the evidence explain exactly what happened that night? The 4 accused men, Vernon Whitboy, Geraldo Parsons, Eben van Niekerk, and Nashville Julius, appeared before the Western Cape High Court to answer multiple charges connected to the events involving Hannah Cornelius and Cheslin Marsh. As proceedings began, the court's responsibility was clear. Every allegation would be tested against the evidence, and every accused person would receive a fair hearing under South African law. From the prosecution's opening presentation, the focus remained on the evidence rather than emotion. Prosecutors explained that their case did not depend on one witness or one decisive exhibit. Instead, they presented a collection of independent findings that supported one another. Detectives outlined how surveillance recordings, mobile phone data, banking activity, forensic examinations, recovered belongings, and witness testimony gradually formed one consistent sequence of events. The defense challenged several parts of the state's presentation. Defense lawyers questioned identification procedures, examined the reliability of certain witnesses, and argued that some conclusions drawn during the investigation should be viewed with caution. Throughout the proceedings, both sides questioned witnesses extensively, allowing the court to compare every statement against the documented evidence. As the trial continued, detectives described how the investigation had progressed step by step. They explained the examination of the Volkswagen, the recovery of surveillance footage from businesses and banking locations, the tracing of financial transactions, and the analysis of electronic records collected during the inquiry. Rather than relying on assumptions, investigators demonstrated how each new finding was verified before becoming part of the official case file. Forensic specialists then explained the scientific work completed during the investigation. Their testimony focused on professional procedures used to collect, preserve, document, and analyze physical evidence. They described how laboratory findings were compared with the broader investigative timeline, helping the court understand how different pieces of evidence related to one another. Digital evidence also became an important part of the proceedings. Banking records, mobile phone information, location data, and surveillance systems provided timestamps that investigators used to confirm movements throughout the evening. Prosecutors argued that these independently generated records offered an objective framework that could be measured against witness testimony and investigative findings. Several civilian witnesses appeared before the court as well. Some described events they had personally observed, while others identified recovered property or explained interactions that later became important during the investigation. Every witness was questioned by both legal teams, allowing the court to carefully assess the accuracy and consistency of each account before reaching any conclusions. One of the most closely followed moments came when Cheslin Marsh gave evidence. His testimony helped the court understand the timeline from the perspective of the surviving victim. During questioning, both the prosecution and defense carefully examined his recollection, comparing it with surveillance records, forensic findings, and other documented evidence. The court considered his testimony as one part of a much larger body of evidence rather than relying on any single witness alone. As proceedings moved forward, prosecutors continued emphasizing that no individual exhibit proved the case by itself. Instead, every verified finding supported another. Surveillance footage aligned with financial records. Digital information matched the investigative timeline. Witness accounts were measured against forensic examinations. According to the prosecution, these independent sources consistently pointed in the same direction. Before delivering judgment, the presiding judge carefully reviewed every category of evidence presented during the trial. The court explained that the decision would be based entirely on the testimony, exhibits, and legal standards required under South African law, without influence from public attention or media coverage surrounding the case. After considering the full body of evidence, the court found Vernon Witbooi, Geraldo Parsons, Eben van Niekerk, and Nashville Julius responsible for multiple charges connected to the incident. The judgment concluded that the prosecution had established its case beyond a reasonable doubt using the evidence presented throughout the proceedings. During the sentencing phase, the court discussed the long-term impact the events had on Hannah Cornelius's family, Cheslin Marsh, and the wider Stellenbosch community. The judge also considered the legal principles that guide sentencing, including the seriousness of the offenses, the interests of society, and the individual circumstances of each offender before imposing lengthy prison terms in accordance with South African law. The legal process did not end with the original judgment. In the years that followed, aspects of the case were reviewed through the appeals process, as permitted under the country's judicial system. Appellate courts examined specific legal arguments raised by the defense before issuing their decisions. While certain issues received further legal review, the central findings of the case remained unchanged. For investigators, the conclusion of the trial marked the end of one of the Western Cape's most closely examined criminal investigations. Months of evidence gathering, forensic analysis, witness interviews, and courtroom examination had produced a detailed public record of how the case was solved through documented facts rather than speculation. Yet even after the legal proceedings had concluded, one question remained. How should Hannah Cornelius be remembered? Beyond the headlines and court records was a young woman whose life, ambitions, and future had left a lasting impression on everyone who knew her. In the final chapter, we look beyond the courtroom to examine the legacy she left behind, the response across South Africa, and the changes her case inspired. When the legal proceedings came to an end, the public conversation gradually shifted away from the courtroom. For Hannah Cornelius's family, however, life would never return to what it had been before September 2017. The headlines faded, but the absence of a daughter, a sister, and a friend remained part of everyday life. Throughout the years that followed, Hannah's family consistently encouraged people to remember the person she had been rather than allowing one tragic event to define her entire life. Friends remembered her as thoughtful, dependable, and generous with her time. She was known for treating people with kindness, building lasting friendships, and approaching university life with optimism and determination. Those qualities became the legacy her family wanted the public to remember. Hannah's father spoke publicly after the conclusion of the case, choosing his words carefully. Rather than expressing anger, he emphasized the importance of allowing the justice system to complete its work. He thanked the investigators, prosecutors, emergency responders, and everyone who had worked professionally to establish the facts. His message reflected a family's desire for accountability while also encouraging people to remember Hannah's character instead of focusing only on the circumstances that brought national attention to her name. Her mother shared a similar perspective. During interviews, she often spoke about preserving Hannah's memory through positive action. She encouraged people to remember the values Hannah lived by: kindness, respect, education, and compassion. Those close to the family said they wanted future generations to know Hannah for the life she lived and the difference she made in the lives of others. Hannah's younger brother remained largely outside the public spotlight, a decision the family intentionally protected. Even so, it was clear that the case affected every member of the household. Despite enormous public interest, the family chose to support one another privately while showing remarkable dignity throughout the legal process. For Cheslin Marsh, rebuilding life became a gradual process measured not in weeks or months but in years. Supported by family, friends, medical professionals, and the wider community, he focused on moving forward one step at a time. His determination became clear as he returned to Stellenbosch University to continue the education that had been interrupted. Choosing to return to campus required resilience. Walking the same university grounds carried difficult memories, yet Cheslin remained committed to completing the goals he had set before 2017. Lecturers and fellow students described him as disciplined, focused, and determined to continue building his future. That determination eventually led him to complete his legal studies. Cheslin later qualified as an attorney, marking an important milestone in his life. Many people viewed his achievement as an example of perseverance and personal strength. Rather than allowing one chapter of his life to define every chapter that followed, he continued pursuing a profession centered on justice and the rule of law. Although Cheslin has occasionally spoken about accountability and the importance of the legal process, he has largely chosen a private life. His decision has allowed his professional work to speak for itself while maintaining respect for the deeply personal nature of the case. The wider Stellenbosch community also responded in meaningful ways. Students, university staff, local residents, and community leaders gathered for memorial services and candlelight vigils, creating opportunities for people to support one another while honoring Hannah's memory. These events focused not on the investigation, but on remembering a young woman whose life had touched many others. Stellenbosch University also paid tribute to Hannah. Fellow students and lecturers remembered her as someone who contributed positively to campus life through her friendships, commitment to learning, and willingness to help others. Their reflections reinforced the image of Hannah that existed long before the case became national news. One of the most enduring tributes established in her memory was the Hannah Cornelius Bursary Fund. Created to support students facing financial challenges, the fund reflects Hannah's belief in education and opportunity. Each student who benefits from the bursary continues a legacy built on encouragement, hope, and the belief that education can change lives. Beyond the university, the case prompted widespread discussion throughout South Africa about public safety, community responsibility, and support for victims' families. Government officials, educators, community organizations, and residents examined ways to strengthen cooperation between communities and law enforcement while encouraging practical measures aimed at improving public safety. Although these conversations extended beyond a single case, Hannah's story became an important reference point in those discussions. The investigation itself also became widely recognized within South African law enforcement and legal circles. Detectives demonstrated how careful forensic work, digital evidence, surveillance analysis, financial records, and patient investigative methods could be combined to establish a reliable sequence of events. The case remains an example of how multiple independent sources of evidence can work together to support a complex investigation. Years later, Hannah Cornelius continues to be remembered for much more than the legal case associated with her name. Family members, friends, classmates, and members of the wider community have remained consistent in their message. Remember her kindness, her ambition, her generosity, and the positive influence she had on those around her. For many people, that has become the most lasting lesson from this case. Behind every investigation, every court proceeding, and every headline is a family whose lives are permanently changed. Remembering that human reality is just as important as understanding the facts of the investigation itself. Today, Hannah's legacy continues through the people who loved her, the students whose education has been supported in her memory, and the ongoing commitment to reporting cases like this with accuracy, fairness, and respect. Long after the legal proceedings concluded, that legacy remains the part of her story that continues to make a difference. At the beginning of this documentary, we return to one decision that appeared completely ordinary. A university student offering to drive a friend home after an evening out. It was a simple act of kindness, made without hesitation and without any reason to believe that it would become part of one of South Africa's most widely discussed criminal investigations. As investigators began their work, very little was immediately clear. Detectives were faced with scattered pieces of information, uncertain timelines, and difficult questions. But as the evidence grew, each verified finding helped explain another. Surveillance footage, forensic examinations, financial records, witness testimony, and digital evidence gradually revealed a complete picture built on documented facts rather than assumptions. The investigation demonstrated the importance of patience, professionalism, and evidence-based policing. Every major conclusion presented before the court was supported by work that could be examined, tested, and challenged through the legal process. That careful approach ensured that the outcome rested on proof instead of speculation. For Hannah Cornelius's family, no legal decision could replace the future they had imagined for their daughter. Even so, they consistently encouraged people to remember Hannah for the person she was, her kindness, her ambition, and the positive influence she had on those around her. That message has remained at the heart of her legacy. For Cheslin Marsh, the years that followed became a testament to resilience. Continuing his education, qualifying as an attorney, and rebuilding his life showed that determination can endure even after the most difficult chapters. His path forward became part of this story as well, not because it erased the past but because it demonstrated that moving forward is possible. Today, the Hannah Cornelius case continues to be studied not only because of the investigation itself, but because it highlights the value of careful police work, forensic science, responsible journalism, and a justice system built on evidence. It also serves as a reminder that every case file represents real people, real families, and lives that extend far beyond courtroom proceedings. In the end, this story is remembered not simply because of the investigation or the trial. It is remembered because of the life Hannah lived, the determination shown by those who searched for the truth, and the commitment of everyone who ensured that the facts were established through